Welcome back to the Havens Cafe. Over a little cup of espresso, we're going to continue our discussion from the previous video. This time we're going to make it a little bit more advanced. So we're talking about how the dollar is rising, and that is because the global energy trading system is dollar denominated. Okay, so when things like this happen, Trump attacks Iran, which controls the Straits of Hormuz, which is a place through which a vast chunk of the world's oil and gas flow. Then people begin stockpiling dollars because they have to use those dollars to pay for energy. And the cheaper they get those dollars, the better. Okay? And so that causes the dollar to go up. So we're going to talk a little bit more about this. All right? Energy shock. But in not just an energy shock, macroeconomic rupture, macroeconomic transformation. So this is the first energy shock in the new world. Let's call it the post-Trump world, okay? And by that, I mean a world in which Trump has shown that he doesn't care about the ideas of global, right, democracy, peace, justice, international law, anything, right? He's just willing to go in there and decapitate countries. He's willing to go in there and kill people, as many as it takes to get whatever bright fantasy he's living out done, okay? We all know it's not going to stop here, right? Venezuela, Iran, Cuba, who knows who's next, right? Is Greenland or the boots on the ground in the north? Who knows? So, first energy shock of the era in which the global order is imploding around us, okay? And the only operating principle left here is what Trump said a few months ago. I am the only force of sovereignty left in the world. What I decide goes, okay? So how is all this likely to play out? Is the idea here that the only haven left is going to be the dollar, right? Because, hey, Trump, right, can declare war on anything now? I don't think so. And I'll tell you why I don't think so. In the old world, okay, the way that we responded to energy shocks was the way that institutions, countries, banks, whatever, are still responding now. And that says, let's stockpile dollars for this energy shock, because we need to use them to pay for this energy later. And the cheaper we get them, the better now. Okay? It's the cause of the dollar to rise. Now, there's another way to play this game too, by the way, which is to say, hey, let's force down the value of the dollar. That way is called capital war. I have discussed capital war with you before. It's a term that Ray Dalio has begun using too. Capital war means something like this. We wanted to force down the value of the dollar very significantly. Bang, like that. How would we do it? Well, we would dump US T-bills, and we dump US dollars, okay? Now, who can do that? China can do it, Japan can do it, and the EU can do it, okay? So world's powers together can do that very simply and very easily, all right? One of the things that we saw that's very interesting over the last few days, and we were just discussing this in the last video, was that if we really thought that US assets were going to be the havens of the next world order, then we would have expected at a moment like this, US T-bills, government bonds, to rally. We would have expected them to go up in value, right? The world would have said, hey, all right, well, I guess Trump is the only force left, so let's buy US T-bills. At least we're safe that way. The opposite happened. It was the first war, I think, in modern history in which US T-bills have fallen, okay? It's a big tell, all right? It tells us people are stockpiling dollars because they have to pay for energy. But they don't want to invest in American assets. And part of the way that they're financing those dollars is by selling off US T-bills. Okay? So now, let's take the other scenario, in which we want to force down the value of the dollar. Because the lower it gets, the cheaper we get our energy, right? Well, at any moment, China could respond with capital war. So China has been very clear about this, okay? And if you follow, so China puts out the way that it thinks in these kinds of, shadow publications. They're like semi-official newspapers of the Chinese state, if you know where to look, right? And if you read between the lines, you know that the op-eds, the editorials are coming from the intellectual class of China that runs, how they think. So I'm telling you that because I read that stuff. And so what China has said over the last few days, something very interesting. They've said, we don't want to enter this war. We are putting forth a new idea of global order, which is actually based on peace and non-aggression. It's actually based on cooperation. Now, I'm not endorsing it, right? It's not one side or the other. None of this is about politics for me. here, right? But it is about how different parties think, okay? She's been very clear about that, okay? And that is what it's saying to the world also. And then the question for the world becomes, well, which system do you want to choose, right? Do you want to choose the system that's being put in force by an America that's just kind of like violently bombing every like nations and kind of like threatening their friends and allies, right? Like I said in the last video, Merits in Germany, parts of Europe, European leaders are going along with Trump. They're just kissing his ass and appeasing him, capitulating. The same Europe that Trump threatened 2 months ago with the invasion of Greenland, right? So there's that vision of the world, and then there's the one that China is putting forth. Right now, I'm not saying you have to believe the one that China is putting forth. That's not what I'm saying at all. All right? I'm nobody's mouthpiece. I have no interest in being anybody's mouthpiece. I hate talking about this stuff. I like music. You can see, right? Where are the synths? Right? They're the synths. They're the synths. They're the synths. They're the synths. So, question is, which one of these very different competing visions of world order are different regions of the world likely to go for? Okay, that's going to shape the future of asset values, of macroeconomics, of finance, of everything. All right? Now, my guess is that in the future, right, China's approach is very different to America's approach. And it said this too. It said something else very interesting this weekend. It said, we're very slow. We're very patient. We don't care if it takes 50 years, 100 years for this vision of the world to emerge. We're patient. And we think in those timescales. We don't think in Western timescales, which are, we need to do a trade deal by next week. We need to bomb Iran today. Well, whatever it is, right? So, again, the way that they think is very, very different, okay? All of that is to say that we have parties in the world now with totally different paradigms, totally different ways of thinking about the world, all right? And that brings us back to the idea of capital war, okay? So far, Trump has unleashed the dogs of war, right? Venezuela, Iran, I don't know who's going to be next. Obviously, Cuba will. After that, who knows? This is going to be a constant theme, right? During the Trump years and probably beyond. A violent America. An expansionist America, trying to control the world's oil supply, trying to control this resource, that resource. After that, it'll be rare earths. Who knows? Doesn't matter. So, brings us back to the central question. Well, how do wars evolve? Well, wars generally go from trade wars to physical wars to capital wars. Remember that pattern. It's a very important pattern of history. And in a capital war, the other side knows that it can win usually without firing a bullet. All it has to do is dump the assets that it owns of, right, the aggressor, right, the offending party, however you want to, if you want to use those terms, right? And so at some point here, right, probably even Europe is going to wake up and say, hey, listen, if the only reason we are playing along with Trump's dirty wars is for cheap energy, there are two approaches here, right? One is that we stockpile dollars and drive the price up and get our energy, right, as cheap as we can. The other is that we dump dollars and do a speculative attack on dollars and maybe get energy cheaper that way because energy is priced in dollars, okay? Abstract stuff, complex stuff. Does that make sense? That's a deeper dive for those of you who really want to think about it. Now, I think that capital war, we're already entering the beginning stages of capital war. Remember how this weekend T-bills fell. They didn't rise. There was no havens effect in American assets. People bought the dollar because they had to, energy, but they dumped T-bills, all right? Tells us that they don't want to be part of this. They don't like this. They don't trust this, all right? So, capital war, we're already skating around the edge of capital war. And at some point, capital war is like real war. Somebody makes the first move, like Trump and Israel did on Iran. We don't know when that move will come. But we do know that China is being pushed to the brink, and it doesn't want to get involved militarily, right? It's been very clear about that. But at the same time, it has a very different vision of the world order that it wants to create, right? And it's so opposed to America's vision of world order, right? And America's vision of world order is now unpalatable to everyone. It's unpalatable to a lot of us, right? Just endless war, right? This is what America's going to do. Just take out heads of state that it doesn't, right, like. This is going to go on for the next 10 years, right? So when parties have such widening worldviews, that it heightens the risk of capital war, if not physical war, right? Now, physical war so far between China and America, China is very restrained. It doesn't want it. It's said it repeatedly, right? But capital war is something that probably it's a lot happier to do. And there's a lot of Western thinkers who don't really... I've been teaching you all this because there's a lot of Western thinkers who look at China and say, well, it doesn't want to dump American assets. It'll only end up, right, dumping stuff that it has that's valuable today. And I think this is the wrong way to think about it. Because if you understand that China is thinking 50 to 100 years ahead, it's not thinking in Western 1 year, 5 year time frames. It becomes a lot less relevant, right? If you're going to take a bath, you're going to take a hit, you might as well take it at some point. Because that's what war is, right? We don't go to war thinking that we're not going to take a hit. We know it's going to be costly. We know. Think of physical war. This costs us tanks, bombs, right? People we spent millions of dollars training, human lives, right? War is an immense cost. Capital war is costly too. We don't go into capital war. Capital war is not investment. I go into capital war thinking we're going to make money, maybe 50 to 100 years from now in China's terms or in Western terms, right? 10 years from now. But capital war is a cost. Maybe it's a cost that China is getting ready to pay. All right, so macroeconomically, the terms of the world, fault lines are shifting very, very, very fast, okay? And so havens, I think, are ultimately going to be assets that can survive this fissuring, this breakdown into these fault lines, okay? And I continue not to believe that American assets, dollars, T-bills, etc., are going to be those havens, right? For all the reasons we've discussed, all right? This is getting very, very long. This is getting very, very abstract. All right. Thank you for joining me at Havens Cafe. I'll come back and talk to you guys soon. I hope that helped, all right?